Hello, everybody. Welcome to the AAFLFC podcast. I am delighted today to have here with me as my guest my friend and colleague, Jesse Martineau. Um, and he is a dedicated Franco American and a pleasure to listen to. Jesse is the host of the French Canadian Legacy podcast, known as the FCL podcast. Jesse, like his parents, grew up in Manchester, New Hampshire. Jesse's parents attended l'École Saint-Georges, which was a bilingual school with instruction received in both English and French. Jesse has traced all branches of his family tree back to towns in Quebec. He is on the board of trustees of the Franco-American Center of Manchester. Jesse is a product of Manchester's Catholic school system, having attended St. Anthony Elementary School, St. Joseph Junior High School, and Trinity High School. He holds a bachelor's degree in history from the George Washington University in DC and a Juris Doctor degree from Temple University in Philadelphia. Jesse has served 2 terms as a state representative in the New Hampshire General Court. He currently works as an academic advisor and adjunct professor at Southern New Hampshire University. Jesse, welcome.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for the introduction. I do want to know something kind of fun. The school I went to, that St. Anthony's Elementary School, is now Cardinal Lacroix Academy, after the bishop of this very town, because that's where he went to elementary school. He grew up in Manchester. It's kind of a fun story.
It is. And actually, thank you for sharing that.
I said bishop, it should be cardinal. The cardinal, he's like the top Catholic in all of Canada. He grew up in Manchester. Yeah, fun times.
Thank you for sharing that. I would not have known. But Jesse, please start from the beginning and tell us how you became interested in advocacy for French language and Francophone culture, and about your work at the French Canadian Legacy podcast and blog.
All right, sure. Yeah. I mean, I grew up with it. I was very fortunate to grow up around, the Franco-American presence, although at the time we never said Franco-American. I didn't even know that term until I joined the Franco-American Center here in Manchester. We all just thought of ourselves as French Canadian. But yeah, so I grew up. I mean, it's a huge deal. I know a lot of people who are watching this are probably familiar with the term, the survivance. The survivance was really big for my grandparents. That was something that meant an awful lot to them, which I didn't really appreciate, unfortunately, at the time. I didn't really appreciate till after they were gone, kind of the role that played in their lives and why it was so important to them. But yeah, so I've always been around it, and it just got to a point for me where I remember one day at the office, I ran into a friend of mine, and we were talking about all the great Irish cultural events that were happening in Manchester. And I was just, we have a story too. And I didn't feel like I was doing my part to tell that story. I thought there was more I could be doing, that I should be doing. And that's how I got involved. I ended up reaching out. I got in touch with Tim Beaulieu. And from Tim, I ended up volunteering a couple of Puts In Fests. And then from Puts In Fest, I ended up on the board of the Franco-American Center. And it's all led to this one conversation at work, and now I'm in Quebec City for 6 months.
That's wonderful. My next question, really, it's a big question. Please tell us about your experience in Quebec.
It's interesting.
You're there right now.
I am, yeah. So I've been here, I guess, coming up on a month, but 4 weeks, so a little short. But the first 2 weeks of that, we're in quarantine. So that was bizarre. The battle to get here to begin with was a challenge. It took a couple of years. I was supposed to go last year, but that got completely canceled because nobody could cross the border, period. This time I was able to get across the border because I had a student visa. I was going to go to school full time, so that got me across. But anytime you cross the border now, you have to stay in your place for 2 weeks. So I spent 2 weeks in quarantine. I took some classes online for those 2 weeks, which was great. But now I have the opportunity. It's awesome. I'm living inside the walls. The first street right inside the walls, when you cross into that super old section of Quebec, which is way fun. So that's where I'm living. I'm going to school full time. School's called BLI. It's a language school for adults. I'm in there with students from all over the place. It's pretty interesting. When I started the first week, I was the only one who was a native English speaker, which was way fun of the entire class. There's two from Colombia, one from Ecuador, one Swiss, but a Swiss German, and one from Belgium, but spoke Flemish, didn't know French. So it was a pretty awesome group to just kind of be in there and all learning for very different reasons, all dedicating our lives at this point for one reason or another to study French. It's been way fun. My teacher's awesome. The experience has been awesome so far.
Tell us a little bit about life beyond the classroom. What are your, you mentioned living within the old city, within the walls. How does that feel?
Oh, it's awesome. Yeah, if you've never been to this town, I'm gonna save it to the end maybe, but I'm gonna do a commercial big time for this town. This town is amazing. I mean, I know the tagline you always hear is so Europe, so close is what we get in New England, but it does, where I am absolutely does feel very European. It is really neat. I get to walk, it's just, 2-minute walk for me to Frontenac. So I get to go there all the time. I've gone to, the other day, 2 days ago, I had my first sear of this trip. There's a little place on Petit Champlain where you get your taffy, roll it up on a stick, maple taffy, which is I'm a giant fan of. So that was great to be able to do that. But yeah, I mean, when I want something to do, I can just walk anywhere. And it's funny because I'm not going out of my way to get lost, but I'll just go on walks. And if I say I come to a fork in one of the ways I know, and one of them I don't, I'm going to go the way that gets me more lost. And you can always end up back home because you get your GPS, but in the meantime, it's way, way fun. I met some awesome people already too, for sure. Yeah. Gone, door to door with a group, an activist group already, just meeting just interesting people. It's way fun.
Jesse, thank you for sharing that, and I hope you'll come back, perhaps at a later point to the U.S. of course, but at a later point during your experience, and tell us more. You're still in relatively the early days, but It sounds like you're off to a wonderful start in your new life and in your new studies.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of wild, but I'm pretty confident that even when I'm back, I've already made connections here that I'm going to keep forever. So it's really, really great. People I've been able to meet. I mean, that's always a good thing of any trip, right? Any long-term stay anywhere. A lot of times it's all about the people you meet, the connections you make, the relationships you build, and already been very, very lucky in that respect here.
Absolutely. Now, based on your experience in the U.S. and in Quebec, share with us, please, your thoughts on the role and status of French language and Francophone culture in North America as a whole and in the U.S.
Sure. One thing that I have noticed is that I think for a lot of the Quebecois, at least the ones I've talked to, again, it's only been a couple of weeks, but it seems to me that my impression is that language and culture are completely synonymous. You cannot separate one from the other. And so I've been asked a couple of different times, because people don't understand where I can say, I didn't grow up speaking French, but I grew up, with some aspects of the Franco culture, and they aren't not trying to be, wise or anything. They just honestly look at me and they're like, well, what else is there? Like it's like that for them, it's the same thing. And for me, I try to explain to them how that creates kind of a difficulty for us. Because if all there is to a culture is your language, and I didn't grow up speaking it, then you hear the narrative of it doesn't exist anymore. And so that's the conversation I've been having quite a bit here, actually. It's like, well, I didn't grow up speaking it, but I would go to school with croton sandwiches all the time when I was growing up. I always had the pork pie. I know first of all, my nephew calls me mon oncle. My parents are Meme and Pepe. Like, The Réveillon, I'm very familiar with. So we did grow up with like some of these traditions, some of these aspects of culture. And it just so happens that I don't have the language. And so I think a lot of what I'm doing, at least so far anyway, the connections I've made, is trying to explain that there's a lot of us who don't speak it anymore, but we're trying, and we still want to be connected to this place because this place still means a lot to us. And we would appreciate any assistance you could give is kind of a big talk we've had. Well, at least I've had for sure.
That sounds like a wonderful approach. You're so right. The language and the culture, it's really all about the connections with people and with our own personal cultural identity. Those are great stories that you told about your nephew, the next generation, the future. He calls you mon oncle.
He does.
That future is something that's always with us when we think about languages.
Has to be, absolutely.
So, as you know, and of course I know you know this, between 10 million and 20 million people in the US are of French ancestry, and over 2 million people speak French in the home. Now, again, based on your experience in the US and in Quebec, what advice would you have for those of us who are really working to support and to promote the role and presence of French language and Francophone culture in the US? And how do you envision the future for us?
Yeah, I think there are opportunities here that we are just, I think, making more effort, at least those of us here in Manchester, are just making more effort than we have before to connect with. And I'm talking about cross the border. We have that group, like I mentioned before, who thinks, we don't exist anymore because we don't speak the language. And I think a lot of times, unfortunately, people, at least where I am, hear that narrative and they get discouraged. They get reluctant to become active. I can't tell you how many times I've worked at a cultural fair, and somebody's come up to me at the fair and they've said something along the lines of, well, I'm not French, but my dad was, or something very, very similar. I hear that all the time. And because again, they think because they don't have the language, they don't belong anymore. They're not part of it. And so for me, it's yes, you are. You grew up with a lot of the same traditions I did. Let's talk about how we can do it. And if you know where to look, there's a lot of people up in Quebec who are super excited about the fact that we're still trying. You're going to have those people who are going to knock you down for sure. But there are a lot of people who are just surprised to know that there are still people in America who really try hard to identify with their Franco heritage. I remember the first time through the podcast, I have a friend now in Drummondville. He came down if he wanted to visit. Sure, absolutely. So he came down to Manchester once because he liked the podcast and we became friends. And he's a history teacher up in Drummondville. And the way because he had me talk to his class, and the way he was describing like their reaction to a Franco-American coming on, it would be like if I was about to introduce a pilgrim or something. Like it was something that only existed in a history book, and they were like shocked that we're still around and that somebody my age could talk to them as a Franco-American. So just say that there's groups out there. There are opportunities there. You just got to look for them. And there are absolutely people super motivated to help you on both sides of the border because they really do appreciate the story once they hear it.
That's a great story, that class visit in Drummondville. Bringing this sense, you brought history alive. The idea of all this was in the history books for them. And then there you were. That probably was a great moment that they will remember.
I hope so. It was very fun because I guess the story here, for at least the story that they learned in school for the most part, is all these people leave, the end, period. Like, you don't know that there's more to the story. So to be able to offer and be like, yes, but we had this Petit Canada thing for a long time. We had, all these cultural traditions. I had a meme and a pepe. All these cultural traditions that I think people would be pretty surprised. You go to Chez Vachon, you can still hear French spoken in Manchester every weekday when you want to sit around and grab some breakfast. That's going to happen. So I think people are surprised to hear these stories, and I think it is kind of exciting when you do get to tell the story. And I think they are excited to hear it.
I'm sure they were, and I'm sure they will be if you may have another chance to do something like that again.
I'm planning on it for sure.
Now, as a parent, I'm always interested in the use of language in the home. Based on your experiences now in the U.S. and now on your observations in Quebec, what would be your thoughts on how we might increase the use of French in our homes, in our communities, maybe in terms of children and grandchildren? I know you mentioned your parents and your grandparents and your nephew. How can we bring French more into our daily lives?
Sure. I think for me, it's a lot that I learned as a coach. I coached women's rugby at a couple of different places. I coached at St. Anselm College and I coached at New England College. And one of the big lessons I learned there was that I always had to hit the why. The why piece was enormous for me, because I could talk to a player, an athlete, and explain what they should do in a certain situation. But that wasn't going to register unless I included the why they needed to do that. And for me, I think even starting with like in the junior high or middle school and grade school level, I think we could talk to, at least again, the students I've come across. You can tell them, you should definitely take French. It's this beautiful language. But if you don't hit the why piece, if you don't make it real to them, like there are a lot of doors that will open for you in life if you have this language. There is a lot of things that you will be exposed to that you would not have if you do not have this language. And just show them how exciting it can be once they have it. I think that for me is the best I can come up with at this point, as far as how we can get younger people invested, because that is absolutely enormous. Obviously, that's a huge part. I want my nephew to be able to speak it for sure. In fact, there's a online preschool I've already got him set up for when he's old enough next year, which is very, very fun. But yeah, so there's definitely opportunities there. But I think you do, and even young parents, I think it's important to have that conversation, like I did with my sis. My sis was not a tough sell, but this is why it's a good idea to have Ben have this language. Like I think if we have that kind of conversation, I think that's the best I have as far as what would be effective in trying to get people to learn it and then use it, like you said, because if you don't use it regularly, it's not going to have the impact as if you do. So,
Jesse, I think that's really a very keen insight. And for each person, that quote unquote why is going to be a little bit different.
Sure.
A different facet maybe of the language and the culture that's going to resonate with that particular child, that particular family member or friend. Absolutely. And tying together the learning of the language and then the use of it. That's very insightful. Jesse, it's been wonderful talking with you today. Before we go, is there anything else that you'd like to share?
Again,
any other thoughts?
Yeah, this was awesome. Thank you for inviting me. This has been way fun. I was going to end with a commercial for this town because I love this place. If you have not been, and like a lot of places that are heavy tourist driven, there's a lot of places that were hurting last summer because they did not get the tourists to visit this town. And so there's a lot of places that are just, I guess that's my message. It's opening up. So I know the border isn't open yet, but it will be in the not too distant future. I'm pretty confident. Restaurants are opening up on the 31st of May. So pretty soon you have the restaurants open. So there is an excitement here that is not, life, I guess, is never going to be fully normal, at least not for a while, but closer, certainly closer than it has been. And if this place, when you have the opportunity to visit the museums, to walk around, Petit Champlain. If there's a cooler city on the planet, I haven't seen it yet, then that city, the cooler street on the planet than Petit Champlain. I haven't seen it yet. It's an amazing, amazing place. You're able to hang out at the Place Royale. All these super, super interesting locations that you can visit, all within super easy walking distance. I would highly recommend, and for sure, FCL podcast. We have a Facebook, we have a website. If you were watching this and you're coming, let me know. I will absolutely give you. Now, what I have, this is one thing I've done. I've kind of developed my own tour. I've been working with a bunch of small tours that I found, putting together my own tour. So when visitors do come, I'm ready. So if you do come, let me know. I will absolutely give you what is my new and improved tour of Quebec City.
And you know what, Jesse? It's closer than many Americans realize.
Yeah, I think people are surprised.
Absolutely. It's just up the road.
It's not, from my perspective, it's not much further than like going to New York City, for instance. Yeah.
Jesse, thank you again. I would say bon courage et bonne continuation. I would also say bon séjour. Have a great stay in Quebec. I know you'll love it as much as I did and as much as so many of us have over the many years. Thank you again for sharing your experience with us today. And à la prochaine.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. À la prochaine.